In the opening, a black veteran faces sudden public humiliation inside a store. The arrogance of the police contrasts with his quiet strength. A symbolic act shatters the moment's dignity, but his calm response plants the seed of a larger revelation. "We don't serve your kind here. Get out before I drag you out myself." The officer's words cut through the air like broken glass, loud enough for every shopper in the crowded grocery store to hear. Carts froze in the aisles, parents held onto their children, and a hush fell across the fluorescent-lit space. A line of cash registers blinked impatiently, beeping with items left half-scanned. The officer stood at the entrance with arms wide, chest puffed out, his badge glinting under the overhead light. His partner leaned on a shelf of potato chips, smirking. As if the humiliation unfolding before them was entertainment. In front of them stood a tall black man in a worn leather jacket, silver strands in his short hair, his boots heavy with the weight of memory. He didn't move. His face didn't twist in anger. His eyes carried the patience of someone who had survived more than insults, someone who knew silence could be louder than rage. People whispered. A mother pulled her son closer. An elderly woman clutched her purse. A cashier lowered her gaze, pretending to focus on receipts, though her ears burned red with shame for the man being targeted. The officer took a step closer, sneering. "Didn't you hear me? You don't belong in here." His hand shot forward, gripping the man's veteran ID, the laminated card the man had quietly held up to prove his right, his dignity, his service. With one sharp tug, the officer ripped it in half. Gasps rippled through the store. The shredded card drifted to the floor like broken honor. For a moment, even the officer seemed to realize the weight of what he'd done, but his arrogance quickly disguised it. He shoved the man in the chest, forcing him a step back toward the automatic doors. The man finally spoke, his voice calm, low, carrying through the aisles with the weight of steel. "You wear a badge," he said. "Steady, but I wore a flag." The words hit harder than any shove. Silence deepened. The officer's smirk faltered for the briefest second, though he recovered quickly with a bark of laughter. But as the veteran bent to pick up the torn halves of his ID, his hand lingered on the floor just long enough for the crowd to notice the small pin on his lapel, an eagle engraved in gold. The kind of pin no ordinary man wore. Doors slid open behind him with a rush of night air. He stepped out, shoulders straight, dignity intact, though the torn card trembled in his hand. Behind him, the crowd stirred. They had no idea yet who they had just seen. Only the officer noticed the pin, and for the first time, his throat tightened, because it meant this man was not just another customer. He was something far greater. And outside, headlights were pulling up to the curb. The automatic doors slid shut behind him with a hollow hiss, sealing off the fluorescent brightness of the store. Outside, the parking lot stretched wide under the orange glow of sodium lights, every shadow stretching longer than it should, every whisper carrying farther in the cool evening air. The veteran's boots struck the pavement with deliberate weight. Each step echoed in silence, as if the ground itself remembered what it had carried before. Dusty battlefields, foreign roads, the long march of men who never came home. He gripped the torn halves of his veteran ID in one hand, his knuckles pale with restraint rather than rage. Behind the glass doors, shoppers pressed close, watching as though a theater curtain had closed on the first act and reopened on another stage. Mothers whispered to their children, "Don't stare." Cashiers leaned forward, forgetting their stations. Caught between shame and curiosity, the officer followed him out, swagger in every step, his partner trailing a pace behind. "That's right," the officer barked, his voice sharp against the night. "Keep walking. Don't ever come back here." But the veteran did not keep walking. He stopped halfway across the parking lot, directly beneath the flickering light of a tilted lamppost. Slowly, he bent down and placed the two halves of his ID card on the asphalt not as trash, but as if laying something to rest. The gesture was deliberate, almost ceremonial. A hush fell over the onlookers. There was something unsettling in the calm way he moved, something that made arrogance feel suddenly small. A teenager with a phone lifted it to record, hand shaking slightly. He's a vet," the boy whispered to no one in particular. His words traveled. Heads turned. Whispers became threads. Threads became knots of quiet conversations. He served. "I think I saw that pin before." "Wait, what rank was he?" The officer scoffed loudly, trying to drown the murmurs. "Don't let him fool you. Anybody can buy a pin online. He's just another." But headlights cut him off. From the far end of the parking lot, a black SUV rolled slowly forward, tires whispering against the pavement. It wasn't a police cruiser. Its tinted windows reflected the pale light, and the quiet hum of its engine carried more authority than sirens ever. The SUV pulled to a stop a few feet away from the veteran. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The air thickened, pressing down on every chest, demanding silence. The rear door opened. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a uniform crisp enough to slice through the night. The rows of medals across his chest shimmered under the lamppost. His stride was firm, his presence undeniable. A general. Gasps erupted from behind the glass doors. Even the officer froze, his hand instinctively drifting toward his belt before stopping mid-motion. His mouth opened, but no words came. The general's eyes fixed on the veteran. For a moment, their gazes locked, one carrying the quiet endurance of a man cast aside, the other the unshaken authority of command. Then, in a movement that stunned every soul present, the general raised his hand slowly, deliberately, and delivered a crisp salute. The parking lot fell into breathless silence. Even the flickering lamppost seemed to steady itself in respect. The veteran didn't move, didn't return the salute, yet the air shifted. Dignity, once ripped, began to stitch itself back together, thread by unseen thread. Inside the store, someone whispered, almost reverent, "Who is he?" But the officer already knew the answer, or at least enough of it. His face paled, his arrogance cracking like glass under weight, and though no words were spoken, the message in that salute was louder than any accusation. "The man you threw out is a man this nation salutes." The salute hung in the air like a banner unfurled proud, undeniable, impossible to ignore. It wasn't just a gesture between two men. It was history bowing its head in the middle of a grocery store parking lot. The officer swallowed hard, throat dry, his voice breaking the silence. This is a mistake," he stammered, trying to laugh. "He's nobody. Just some drifter with a fake pin, right?" But the crowd was no longer looking at him. Every pair of eyes, from the mothers clutching their children to the teenagers gripping their phones, was fixed on the veteran and the general. Even the glass of the store windows reflected the scene back like a mirror, capturing the divide. Arrogance on one side, dignity on the other. The general lowered his salute, his gaze unwavering. He spoke, his voice calm but carrying authority that could silence storms. "Sergeant Major," the words struck like thunder. Not sir, not mister, a title. A rank, recognition. The veteran finally lifted his head, meeting the general's eyes. "General," he said simply, his voice steady as stone. The officer's smirk dissolved. His badge suddenly felt heavier on his chest, like a lid dragging him down. The crowd shifted uneasily, their whispers turning into a low current of shock. "Sergeant Major." Someone muttered, "That's not just anyone. That's high." The veteran's pin caught the lamplight again, glinting gold. The eagle, wings spread wide, perched atop a globe, an emblem of service that couldn't be bought or faked. Its shine cut through the night, brighter than the officer's badge. Brighter than the flashing lights of patrol cars arriving in the distance, the officer stepped forward, desperate to reclaim authority. Enough of this circus. Everyone back inside. This man assaulted me. Assaulted? A voice from the crowd snapped. It was the teenager who had been recording. He held his phone high, the screen glowing. I've got everything on video. He didn't lay a hand on you. But you ripped his ID. You shoved him. Murmurs turned into outrage. A mother raised her voice. He served this country, and you humiliated him. The officer's partner shifted uneasily, the smirk gone from his face. He muttered under his breath, "This doesn't look good, man." The general's jaw tightened. It's worse than that. This man bled for the freedoms you hide behind your badge. And you chose to disgrace him, in front of the very people you're sworn to protect. The officer's face flushed crimson, but his arrogance fought to survive. So what? He's just a man. He doesn't get special treatment. The veteran finally moved. Slowly, he picked up the torn halves of his ID card from the pavement. Holding them carefully, almost reverently, he pressed them back together. The rip was still visible, but the action itself spoke louder than words. Dignity reclaimed, piece by piece. Then he looked directly at the officer. His voice was low, but it carried like a drumbeat. You ripped a card. You can't rip what I've earned. The crowd erupted not in cheers, not in noise, but in something more dangerous for the officer. Silence laced with respect. A silence that judged him. For the first time, the officer shifted back, his boots scraping against asphalt. His badge didn't shine so brightly anymore. The general stepped closer to the veteran, placing a hand firmly on his shoulder. It wasn't just camaraderie, it was a declaration. "You're not alone tonight, Sergeant Major." From somewhere in the crowd, a voice whispered the question everyone had been too afraid to ask. What happens to the officer now? The answer hadn't yet come, but the balance of power had shifted. The badge, once a symbol of authority, now looked smaller than the pin glinting on the veteran's chest. And for the first time, the officer realized his collapse had already begun. Blue and red flashes painted the walls of the store as two more police cruisers pulled into the parking lot. Their sirens had been silent, but their lights strobed like restless judgment across faces in the crowd. Officers stepped out, hands brushing holsters, ready to act until they saw who stood at the center of it all. The general's uniform, immaculate and commanding, froze them mid-stride. They glanced at one another, uncertainty spreading like wildfire. Was this still a simple call? Or had they just walked into something much bigger? The first officer, the one who had shoved the veteran, tried to seize the moment. He barked orders, his voice cracking but loud. Everyone disperse. This man was trespassing and resisting law enforcement. No one moved. Not a single person stepped back. Instead, the crowd edged closer, their silence pressing in around him. The teenager with the phone lifted it higher. "I got it all," he said again, louder this time. His voice wavered, but courage clung to it. "You can't lie your way out." The officer's partner tugged his sleeve, muttering urgently, "Stop, man. Just stop. This is spinning out of control." But arrogance is a fragile thing. It doesn't break quietly. It shatters with noise. "I don't care if he was a soldier," the officer shouted. "This is my town. My store, my rules." The words rang hollow. His badge gleamed, but it no longer carried weight. The veteran stood still, shoulders squared, face calm. He hadn't raised his voice once. He hadn't lashed out, hadn't cursed, hadn't begged. And that calmness, that unshaken dignity, carved deeper cracks into the officer's crumbling facade. The general finally stepped forward. His boots clicked against the pavement, each sound echoing louder than the officer's shouts. He stopped just a few feet away and spoke with steel in his tone. You think authority is yours to give? The general's eyes burned into the officers. Authority is earned. This man earned it long before you pinned that badge to your chest. A ripple of murmurs surged through the crowd. Some nodded, some whispered, and others simply stared at the officer with new eyes, not seeing a protector, but a man stripped bare. One of the newly arrived officers shifted uncomfortably. "Sir," he addressed the general with a respectful nod, "we didn't know." His sentence trailed off, the unspoken truth heavy in the air. If we had, this wouldn't have happened. But that was the point. The veteran shouldn't need a title to be treated with dignity. The veteran finally spoke, voice low and steady. "I didn't fight for salutes. I fought so men like him could wear that badge with honor." But tonight, he forgot what it means. The words cut deeper than any reprimand. The officer's face twisted, searching for a comeback, a way to claw back control, but none came. Every second of silence tightened the noose around his arrogance. A woman from the crowd suddenly raised her voice. "He deserves an apology." Others echoed it. "Apologize. You disgraced him. Say it." The chants grew, soft at first, then stronger, pulsing with the weight of truth. Phones recorded. Faces turned. The officer stood at the center of a storm he had created, his power shrinking with every heartbeat. The general didn't need to raise his voice. His presence alone demanded it. But the crowd, ordinary people, had taken the torch. Their voices filled the night, their demand undeniable. Apologize. The veteran didn't move, didn't demand. His silence was louder than their cries, his composure more powerful than any speech. The officer's lips parted. No words came. His pride fought, but his collapse had already begun. And just then, the sound of heavy boots echoed from beyond the parking lot. More uniforms. Not police this time. Soldiers. The officer's face drained of color. The sound came first, boots striking pavement in perfect rhythm, a cadence that spoke of discipline and unity. Heads turned toward the far side of the lot as a small unit of soldiers emerged from the shadows, their uniforms sharp under the wash of patrol car lights. The crowd parted instinctively, not from fear but from reverence. These men carried no sirens, no flashing badges, no barked commands. Their authority walked beside them, silent yet undeniable. At their front was a young captain, his posture rigid, eyes scanning the scene with quick precision. He didn't glance at the crowd, nor at the flashing cruisers. His gaze locked immediately on the veteran standing beneath the lamppost. The officer who had caused it all shifted nervously. His badge gleamed under the strobes, but for the first time he seemed aware it could not shield him. His voice cracked as he tried to reassert himself. "This is a police matter. You soldiers need to stand back." The captain's jaw clenched. He gave no reply to the officer. Instead, he approached the veteran, stopping just a few feet away. Then, in one fluid motion, he saluted. One by one. The soldiers behind him mirrored the gesture, a line of raised hands slicing through the night. The parking lot, moments earlier filled with shouts and murmurs, descended into awed silence. The general, still at the veteran's side, returned the salute briefly before lowering his hand. His voice carried like rolling thunder. "You see, officer, respect cannot be commanded. It must be earned. Tonight, these men recognize a leader. While you—" His words trailed off deliberately, leaving the silence to finish the sentence. The officer's face flushed red, his chest rising and falling unevenly. "This is ridiculous. He's just another," but the veteran finally stepped forward, breaking his stillness. His boots pressed against the pavement with quiet weight, closing the distance between himself and the officer. The torn halves of his ID card were still in his hand, trembling slightly under the lamplight. He spoke softly, but every ear strained to catch the words. "I gave my youth to protect strangers. I carried men out of fire who didn't look like me, didn't pray like me, didn't even know my name. And I'd do it again. But tonight, he lifted the torn card, letting its edges flutter in the breeze. Tonight you reminded me that some battles don't end overseas. They follow us home. The crowd shivered with his words. Mothers held their children tighter. Some of the younger men clenched their fists, not in anger, but in shame for what they had witnessed. The officer opened his mouth, but the teenager with the phone shouted over him, voice breaking with passion. We all saw it. You shoved him. You ripped that card. You don't deserve your badge. The chants returned, this time louder, angrier, carrying the weight of truth. Accountability. Accountability. The officer's partner muttered under his breath again, louder this time, almost pleading. Let it go, man. Just stop before it ruins you. But it was too late. The ruin had already begun. His arrogance had been weighed against dignity, and it was collapsing under the scale. The veteran turned his gaze away from the officer and looked instead at the crowd. His voice carried a weary strength. Don't fight for me tonight. Fight for what's right tomorrow. That's how respect lives longer than anger. Even the general inclined his head, acknowledging the quiet wisdom. The officer's fists clenched at his sides. He wanted to shout, to claw back power with words or force, but his voice died in his throat. Surrounded by soldiers, watched by civilians, overshadowed by a general, and judged by the calm presence of the man he had tried to humiliate, he had no ground left. Somewhere in the distance, more headlights appeared. Media vans. Cameras. The story was about to spill beyond this parking lot, and the officer realized with dawning horror. The world was about to see who he really was. The parking lot glowed brighter as headlights swept across the asphalt. Vans screeched to a halt, their satellite dishes already rising toward the sky. Reporters spilled out, cameras perched on shoulders. Microphones thrust forward like weapons of light. The crowd shifted, a collective murmur spreading, the media is here. Phones were lowered as professional lenses took their place. What had been whispers in the store, then chants in the lot, was now about to be broadcast far beyond these walls. The officer stiffened, sweat glistening along his hairline despite the cool night. He straightened his uniform, puffed out his chest, and forced a smirk back onto his face. Cameras were something he understood. Cameras could be manipulated. He raised his voice, loud and authoritative, hoping the microphones would catch only his version. This man was causing a disturbance inside the store. When asked to leave, he resisted. We followed procedure. Liar! Someone shouted from the crowd. The teenager shoved his phone forward, the screen glowing with proof. I've got the whole thing. Every shove. Every word. The world's about to see. The camera swung toward him. A ripple of cheers rose from the bystanders. Reporters rushed closer, sensing the real story was not the officer's hollow speech but the quiet man standing in the lamplight with a torn card in his hand. One reporter broke through the noise. Microphone extended toward the veteran. Sir, what happened here tonight? The veteran lifted his eyes. The lenses zoomed in, capturing the lines of age, the silver in his hair, the steadiness in his gaze. He didn't shout. He didn't point fingers. He simply spoke. I came to buy groceries. Instead, I was told I didn't belong. My service was torn apart in front of strangers. He held up the two halves of his veteran ID, the rip glaring under the lights. But a card isn't service. A man's dignity can't be ripped. The crowd hushed. Even the hum of the camera equipment seemed to fade. His words traveled beyond the lot, carried instantly across live streams, broadcasts, and countless shared clips. The general stepped beside him, his presence a wall of authority. This man is Sergeant Major Williams. He led soldiers through battles most of you only read about. And tonight, he was thrown out like a criminal. His voice hardened. That is the story you should tell. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some reporters scribbled furiously. Others froze, stunned by the weight of the name. Sergeant Major, a title that demanded respect. The officer's smirk faltered again. This is being blown out of proportion, he stammered, his voice cracking under the heat of the lights, but the cameras had already turned from him. They focused instead on the veteran and the general, the soldiers who stood like pillars of respect, and the crowd whose faces burned with outrage. One woman stepped forward, her voice trembling but strong. My father served too. He died overseas. To see you treat him like that. Her words broke off into silence, tears spilling down her cheeks. The cameras caught it all. The officer tried one last time, shouting, "You don't understand the pressure of this job. We make hard calls." But the general cut him off with a single line, delivered cold and sharp. Respect isn't a hard call. The crowd roared. Some clapped, others shouted, and more phones rose into the air, capturing the moment the badge shrank under the weight of truth. The officer's chest heaved. His words were gone. His power slipping faster with every flash of a camera bulb dot, and somewhere behind the news crews, a city official arrived, suit pressed, eyes sharp, jaw tight. He wasn't here as a bystander. He was here for accountability. The officer saw him and felt the ground beneath him. His reckoning had only just begun. The arrival of the city official sent a ripple through the crowd. He stepped from his car with quiet authority, his tailored suit catching the glow of the flashing patrol lights. His polished shoes clicked against the asphalt as he approached, his expression unreadable, but his eyes sharp and calculating. The officer straightened instantly, his body snapping to rigid formality. "Councilman Harris," he blurted, forcing confidence into his trembling voice. "Good to see you, sir. I was just handling a situation here." The councilman raised a hand, silencing him. His gaze swept the scene, the torn ID card in the veteran's hand, the soldiers standing like stone pillars, the general whose presence radiated command, and the restless crowd whose anger had turned into an unspoken verdict. Finally, Harris spoke. "What kind of situation requires humiliating a veteran in front of half the town?" The officer's mouth opened and closed. "Sir," he was resisting. The teenager with the phone broke in, voice sharp. "Resisting what? Buying milk? I've got the whole thing right here. Want me to airdrop it to every reporter here?" He held the phone high, its screen glowing like evidence carved into light. The cameras swiveled again, eager predators scenting blood. Harris's expression darkened. "Play it." The boy's thumb tapped the screen. The crowd turned toward him, and suddenly the parking lot became an outdoor theater. The video played loudly, the officer's own words echoing back at him like ghosts. "We don't serve your kind here." "Didn't you hear me?" "You don't belong in here." Gasps rippled again, louder this time. The officer's voice on the recording was uglier than memory had preserved, spat with venom, thick with entitlement. The video captured the shove, the rip of the ID card, the veteran's quiet reply, "You wear a badge." "I wore a flag." The crowd erupted, not in chaos but in fury laced with sorrow. Mothers cried out, men cursed under their breath, and the chant began again. "Apologize. Apologize." The officer turned red, then pale, then red again, flailing for a lifeline. "That video doesn't show the whole story. He must have provoked me." "You don't understand," but the crowd wasn't listening anymore. Neither was Harris. His attention had shifted to the veteran who stood still beneath the lamppost, calm amid the storm. "Sir," Harris said, his tone respectful, "do you wish to press charges?" The veteran's eyes lifted slowly, heavy with memory. He glanced at the officer shaking now, his arrogance cracking like plaster, and then at the crowd, buzzing with rage. His voice was soft but steady. "I don't want revenge," he said. "I want change." The words stilled a chance. Silence spread across the lot, heavy and reverent. Even the cameras paused, their operators struck by the weight of the moment. The veteran held up the torn halves of his ID card, raising them just enough for the lights to catch. "This card can be replaced. But dignity? Trust? Respect? Those are harder to mend." Tonight, it wasn't just me who was torn. It was this community. Every person who watched and said nothing at first. Every child who now wonders if a uniform makes you the enemy instead of the protector. That's what needs to be fixed. His words pierced deeper than anger ever could. Heads bowed. Some in the crowd wiped their eyes. The soldiers stood taller, proud of the man they had once followed and still followed in spirit. The general added quietly, "That is the voice of leadership. Even when disrespected, he chooses to rise." The officer snapped, unable to bear the weight of silence. "This is insane. You're all turning against me because of one mistake. I've served this town for 10 years. The general's eyes cut into him. Service without respect isn't service. It's tyranny." The officer flinched as if struck. Councilman Harris sighed, the sound heavy with disappointment. "Officer Daniels," he said, using the name for the first time, "you've disgraced your badge. You'll be suspended effective immediately pending investigation." The crowd exhaled, some gasping, others clapping softly. Phones recorded every word. Daniels stumbled back, eyes wide. "You can't do this. You can't take my badge." But Harris's voice was final. "The badge was never yours. It belongs to the people. And tonight, they've made their decision." The officer's partner stepped aside, his face pale. Quietly, almost shamefully, he muttered, "He's right." Daniels's chest heaved, panic bubbling. His gaze darted to the cameras, then to the crowd, then finally to the veteran. Hatred flickered in his eyes, but it was hollow now, the fury of a man already defeated. The veteran, calm as ever, spoke one last time. "I don't need your apology. I need you to remember this night every time you see a man who looks like me. And I need this town to remember too. Respect isn't about who you push down, it's about who you choose to lift up." The words struck like a benediction. The chants didn't return this time. Instead, the crowd fell into a deep, echoing silence, the kind that lives longer than noise, the kind that plants itself into memory. Cameras rolled. Reporters whispered into microphones. The story was no longer about a simple altercation in a grocery store. It was about something much larger, a mirror held up to authority, forcing everyone to see what was reflected back. The general placed a steady hand on the veteran's shoulder. The soldiers behind him stood immovable, salutes still fresh in their posture, and under the harsh lights of cameras, badges and uniforms, the truth had never been clearer. One man's arrogance had collapsed. Another man's dignity had risen, but the night was not over, because accountability was only the beginning. The echoes of Harris's words still hung in the night air. Suspended effective immediately. It was more than a decision, it was a declaration. The crowd had witnessed justice touch the untouchable, and it left them buzzing with something they hadn't felt in years: possibility. The reporters wasted no time. Microphones extended like spears, their voices overlapping. "Sir, how does it feel to finally be heard? Do you believe this incident reflects a larger issue of systemic bias? Will you be filing a lawsuit?" The veteran lifted his hand gently, calming the storm. His voice, though quiet, cut through the noise. "This isn't about me alone. It's about every person who's been told they don't belong. Tonight, I want this community to ask itself, who else have we ignored? Who else have we failed to defend? The words landed like stones in still water, ripples spreading. Faces in the crowd shifted uneasily. A white-haired woman whispered to her neighbor, "I saw something like this once at the bank." I didn't say anything. Another man rubbed his forehead, guilt twisting his features. The silence of bystanders was now on trial too. The cameras caught everything. Meanwhile, Officer Daniel, stripped of authority but still clinging to defiance, shouted over the murmurs, "This is mob justice. None of you understand the dangers we face every day wearing this uniform." His voice cracked, more desperate than powerful. The general turned toward him slowly. "Danger does not excuse dishonor. You wore the uniform like armor, but you forgot its weight. Every stripe, every star is earned by sacrifice, not given by fear." Daniels froze. He opened his mouth, but no words came. His partner shifted uncomfortably, finally stepping away as though distance might cleanse him of complicity. In the background, the chant began again, but softer, transformed. Respect, respect. It wasn't for Daniels anymore. It was for the man who stood dignified under the lamppost, and for every story like his waiting to be told. A group of teenagers edged forward, the same ones who had filmed everything. One of them, a girl with braided hair, lifted her chin. "Sir," she asked the veteran shyly, "how do you stay so calm when they treat you like that?" He looked at her, really looked, as though she were the only person in the lot. His reply was simple. Because anger burns fast. But dignity lasts. And one day, when it's your turn to speak, people will remember how you carried yourself. The girl swallowed hard, her eyes shining. She lowered her phone, no longer filming, but simply listening. Councilman Harris addressed the press now, his voice deliberate. "Let tonight serve as a reminder. Authority is not above accountability. We will conduct a full investigation and policies will change. This town belongs to its people, not to fear, not to prejudice." Applause broke out, scattered at first, then swelling until it filled the night. For the first time, hope drowned out the anger. Daniels couldn't bear it. He lunged forward, pointing at the crowd, spittle flying. "You'll regret this. You think one speech fixes everything? You'll see. They'll come crawling back to me when chaos breaks out." But no one moved. No one cowered. The words bounced off the crowd and fell flat at his feet. The man who had once commanded power with a badge now looked small, almost pitiful. The veteran turned his back on him, not in cruelty but in finality. It was a gesture stronger than any argument. This man no longer deserved his energy. The general and the soldiers mirrored him, their silence louder than shouting. Harris gestured subtly, and two uniformed deputies approached Daniels. Not with violence, but with the quiet inevitability of consequence. They didn't drag him, didn't cuff him in front of the cameras. They simply stood beside him until the crowd understood his night was over. Veteran looked up at the stars above the parking lot, where the faint hum of insects carried between breaths. He whispered, not for the crowd, not for the cameras, but for himself. Still standing. It was then that an older man from the back pushed forward, his weathered face lined with regret. He clutched a faded baseball cap in his hands. "Son," he said softly, "I was at that same store years ago when they threw another man out for the color of his skin. I didn't speak up then. Tonight I won't make the same mistake." He turned toward the cameras. "We can't stay quiet anymore." The crowd murmured, some nodding, some weeping openly. Generations of silence cracked, truth spilling into the open like light through broken glass. And so the veteran's words began to stretch beyond him. They were no longer just his. They belonged to the girl with the braided hair, the old man with the hat, the councilman with the microphone, the mother holding her child on her hip, whispering, "Remember this, baby. Remember who stood tall." Even the cameras seemed changed. No longer weapons of spectacle, they had become vessels of witness, carrying the story outward, far beyond the parking lot. Officer Daniels, cornered and defeated, muttered curses under his breath. But the crowd didn't even bother to respond. He had become background noise irrelevant in the face of a larger truth. The general gave the veteran one last nod. "They will remember this night." The veteran's reply was quiet, almost like prayer. "Not for me." "For us." The chant returned, low and steady, carried by dozens of voices into the night air. Respect, respect, respect. This time, it was not protest. It was promise. The night stretched long, but the weight of the moment only grew heavier. The crowd had thinned slightly, yet dozens remained, unwilling to let the air lose its electricity. Camera lights still burned, hungry to capture every second. Councilman Harris had retreated to confer with staffers, and the deputies lingered, keeping a quiet eye on Daniels, who stood slumped against a squad car, stripped of his false confidence. His mutters had faded into silence now, his eyes hollow. The veteran stood apart, the torn ID card still in his hand. The lamppost bathed him in light, casting long shadows that seemed larger than life. He looked like both a man and a monument, fragile in flesh, yet unshakable in spirit. The general, who had been watching silently, finally stepped forward. His boots struck the pavement with the rhythm of authority, each sound magnified by the hush of expectation. The soldiers behind him moved in instinctive unison, forming a line that turned the grocery store parking lot into a parade ground. The general faced the veteran, his jaw set, his eyes glistening under the weight of memory. He reached slowly, deliberately, for the brim of his cap. Every camera zoomed in. Every breath in the crowd stilled. And then the general saluted. Not a casual nod of respect. Not a symbolic gesture for show. It was the kind of salute reserved for the highest honor, the kind that spoke of sacrifice, of shared blood, of battles survived and brothers lost. The soldiers followed, their arms rising in perfect synchronization, salutes sharp as blades cutting through the night. The crowd gasped, then fell silent again. Tears flowed freely, now not from pain, but from the recognition of something sacred. The veteran froze, his chest tightening. Memories surged, boots in foreign soil, nights of fire and smoke, men who never came home. He swallowed hard, his body trembling not from fear but from the weight of being seen, truly seen after so long. He raised his hand slowly, returning the salute with quiet dignity. His arm shook slightly, not from weakness but from the enormity of the moment. The general's voice carried across the silence, low but commanding. "Tonight, we salute not just a soldier, but a man who reminded us what service means. He was disrespected, humiliated, cast aside. And still he chose dignity. That is strength no rank can bestow." The crowd erupted, cheers mixing with tears. Phones lifted high, capturing what would become the image of the night. A black veteran saluting back at a general under the harsh glow of grocery store lights, the remnants of injustice at their feet. Daniels watched, face pale, his mouth twisted in disbelief. He shook his head, muttering, This isn't happening." But no one turned to him. His collapse was complete, not in shackles, but in irrelevance. The chant returned again, louder than ever, rolling like thunder. Respect. 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 Children joined in, their small voices ringing. Elderly veterans in the crowd lifted trembling hands to their brows in salute. Mothers clutched their children tighter, whispering the importance of what they were seeing. General lowered his hand but did not break eye contact with the veteran. "You carried the flag when the world was heavy. Tonight, the world carries you." The veteran's lips parted, but his voice cracked. He steadied himself, then whispered into the silence, "I didn't fight for applause. I fought for the right to stand here as a man." The words silenced the cheers for a heartbeat. Then they came back louder, stronger, echoing into the night sky. Councilman Harris reappeared, his eyes wide, clearly aware that history was unfolding before him. He leaned toward the microphones. "Ladies and gentlemen, remember this night. Let it be the night we turned away from silence. Let it be the night we built something better." The cameras captured every angle. The salutes, the tears, the chants, the broken officers slouched in shadow. By morning, these images would circle the nation, sparking debates, igniting hope, and shaking institutions. But for the people standing there, it was simpler. It was the night they remembered what honor truly looked like. And in that parking lot, beneath the flickering store lights and the weight of centuries, one truth rang clear: power fades, dignity endures. By the time the first light of dawn crept over the rooftops, the grocery store parking lot looked transformed. The neon signs flickered faintly against the pale morning sky, but it wasn't the lights or the asphalt that people would remember. It was the feeling, the shift, the unshakable memory of a night when dignity outshone arrogance. Reporters packed up their equipment, murmuring into phones, their voices buzzing with urgency. Yes, it's trending already. Every outlet wants the footage, front page material. The image of the general saluting the black veteran was everywhere, on phones, on live streams, on news tickers. Overnight, a single act of respect had become a story the nation couldn't ignore. The veteran, though, seemed untouched by the frenzy. He stood quietly at the edge of the lot, his torn ID card folded carefully into his pocket as though it were still whole. His face was tired, but his eyes carried a steady flame. He wasn't basking in glory, he was carrying the same calm he'd held when everything began. "Councilman." Harris approached him one last time. "Sir," he said respectfully, "the town owes you more than words. We'll be holding a hearing. Reforms, accountability measures. This won't die in headlines alone." The veteran gave a small nod. "See that it doesn't. I've seen too many promises fade when the cameras go off." The honesty stung, but Harris didn't flinch. Instead, he offered his hand. The veteran hesitated, then clasped it firmly, sealing a pact not just between two men, but between authority and the people it claimed to serve. Nearby, Daniel sat slouched on the curb, head buried in his hands. His badge had been taken, his power evaporated. People passed by him without fear, without deference. Once his presence had demanded obedience. Now it was met with indifference. The quiet collapse of arrogance was almost louder than the crowd had been. One of the deputies whispered to him, "They'll decide your case in court." Daniels didn't reply. He looked up only once to see the veteran walking away, and in that moment his eyes filled with something raw and twisted. Not hatred, not even regret. Just the hollow realization that respect can't be forced. It has to be earned. The general gathered his soldiers. Before leaving, he turned to the veteran once more. His words were simple, but heavy. "You reminded them tonight. And you reminded me too. Service is not about who salutes you, it's about who you choose to salute." The veteran bowed his head. "And sometimes it's about standing when no one else will." The general's eyes softened, and for a moment, the two men divided by rank but united by experience stood as equals. Then the general raised his hand once more in salute, smaller now, more personal, before stepping back into his car. As the convoy pulled away, the chants faded, replaced by quiet conversations among neighbors. People who hadn't spoken in years lingered together, voices low but determined. Mothers told their children, "Remember this." Fathers said, "We can do better." The awakening wasn't thunderous, it was steady, the slow rising of something long buried. The veteran finally turned to leave, his steps steady on the cracked pavement. The sky was brighter now, painted in hues of orange and gold. as though the world itself was acknowledging the shift. A teenage boy ran up behind him, the same one who had filmed the video. "Sir," he called breathlessly. The veteran paused, turning slightly. The boy held up his phone. "I posted it. Millions of people have seen it already. They know your name. They know what happened." The veteran shook his head gently. "They don't need my name. They need the truth. Hold on to that." The boy's throat tightened, but he nodded. "I will." The veteran walked on. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Behind him, the town had already begun to change. The silence that once enabled cruelty had cracked. The arrogance that once hid behind a badge had fallen. And in its place, a different story was being written, not about a man thrown out of a store, but about a man who walked out with dignity, and a community that finally decided to walk with him. As he reached the edge of the street, sunlight broke fully over the horizon, washing him in gold. His figure stood tall against the glow, a silhouette of resilience, and though his steps were slow, each one rang with quiet thunder, a soldier without a uniform, a veteran without a title, a man who had reminded them all respect is not given by rank nor by badge. It is carved by character. The night was over. A new dawn had begun.